Welcome to the podcast that puts a finger on the pulse of revenue and technology. On this show, you'll hear from industry experts, executives, and investors on the art of transforming B2B businesses into scale-up insurgents. This is Revenue Uncoded.
Get started, so we're going to start out on today's edition of Revenue Uncoded.
Uncoded.
What we want to talk about is explain to me all this buzz talk about ERP systems and advanced billing and slicing all this stuff up. I hear it all the time, and I hear a lot of BS from a lot of people on this stuff. So what do you think about that? ERP, big billing, slicing, what have you?
ERP or enterprise billing? Do you want to start with enterprise, or do you want to go right
let's
to
go.
ERP?
Let's start with enterprise.
Okay, so enterprise. So first of all, I think a lot of people segment the marketplace into two buckets: telco billing, which there are hundreds, and enterprise billing over here, right? So, and on the enterprise billing, I think there's probably half a dozen that are very large, dedicated enterprise billing or functionalities, standalone enterprise billers that work in the enterprise space.
And in the enterprise space, that means we will bill anything.
That's what they claim.
That's the claim. Well, that's the claim I always hear.
That's the claim. So then, in the other side of the enterprise billing space is the ERP vendors that have billing functionality that live in the enterprise space. So I kind of look at it as really kind of three variables. One is all the guys in telco, and all the guys that are enterprise billing people, and then ERP vendors. And guess what all of them say? Oh, we can do that.
We can do anything.
We can do anything. Sure.
I've heard that many times.
Many times. Yeah.
Usually followed by a lot of tears and anguish about 6 months later.
And a lot of money.
And
True.
a lot of money.
And a lot of money. You got to spend a lot of money. But if you throw enough developers and coders and resource people at it,
I'm sure people of course you've got to pay for it.
Yeah.
It should take that amount of time. Okay.
Yeah. So let's go to what you were just talking about with the ERP space. All right. So there's ERP people, all right, and almost all of them have a rating engine. Okay, great. Woo, usage, bring it in, rate it, send it over. Okay. So, but the issue is that the real variable, the real driver on whether or not you should look at an ERP vendor to do your billing is complexity, right? And, again, I hate to kind of repeat some of the things we've said in another podcast, but the real big variable is, what kind of a TCO and 5 to 10 year horizon you really have when you look at trying to choose a billing system when you are in the enterprise space.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you make that choice?
Man, that's a great point. It really kind of gets down to, I hate to say it, just requirements and complexity, and then, putting the system through the paces, right? Giving real sample scrub data. I think when you're looking at the different vendors in a bake-off, and showing who's got the best stuff.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I find it difficult at times when you are reviewing some of these systems and their functionality to get a real flavor for what is an agile change or a flexible change within one of those systems versus one that says, yes, we can do it. But when you peel the onion back, it involves a level of complexity, money, and time on an order of about 10 over what you think should be a flexible piece. Yeah. I think, and that a lot of that's architecture driven and how these different pieces are set up. So I was just trying to think, is there something in that process as a potential purchaser, for example, that I'd want to be looking at to help me judge whether, when I'm doing my bake-off, whether something's actually nimble and flexible? Because I'm not a practitioner in all these things. But if I'm going to sign the check to get this, I want to make sure I'm getting the best value possible for my money.
Well, that's the real fun in a bake-off. You throw them curveballs, right? While they're there. Because I've watched a very, very large international software organization, like one of the top 10, have a bake-off, right, between the industry leader and this other best of breed vendor who shall remain nameless. Us. And so anyway, but they threw it in there and they did that exact thing. They said, this is what we need. This is what we want. They brought them into the laboratory environment, they even put them on a facility for a week. And they said, well, here's the bake off. And as they went through the whole thing, can you deploy this instance, within a week? Can you deal with our data? And then they threw them a curveball. And the large, big battleship organization that said they could do whatever was sitting there doing sock puppets and PowerPoints, while the other organization was showing the actual invoice, the actual based on multi-party settlement and based with this, that, all the other variables. So when I look about the enterprise billing, it's really fun, by the way, because we spend so much time in the telco space, and that has an animal and an entity, and it's bereft with inordinate levels of competition. But when you get over to the ERP space, it's kind of fun, right? Because you're able to leverage best practices that you see in one industry or one vertical and kind of bring it in and kind of leverage it for either a recommendation or for a, when you're looking at the solution architecture, or there's a better way to kind of do a certain process. So you learn different things as you work across all these industries. But back to these, the enterprise space, like I said, I think there's really probably half a dozen that really live in that space. But the half a dozen that live in that space, those half a dozen that really can do, complex, salty,
super
stuff,
complex. It's not,
I think it's a subset of those 6.
Okay.
Right? Now, again, you can throw money and time and resources at it. Can I say one story?
Sure, that would be great, because that paints a picture of how this kind of works.
So
work.
So there was a financial services organization that had a very unique billing challenge, and say they went out and they shopped. I think they looked at 20 different vendors, and so they went through this whole bake off and this whole thing, and the grids and the RFPs and all that, and scrub data and blah blah blah. So fast forward, successful deployment, very happy with it, but it was a small set of, like, a small entity within a financial company. So then somebody else came in and bought, that financial company. And this entity was a big ERP advocate. And they had Mongolian hordes of SAP coders. So, they looked at this entity, and, truth be known is that some politics came into play, and that the CIO of this financial services company, wanted to maintain levels of staffing for his ERP developers that, if you throw enough time and money and resources at it, you can make anything get done.
Yeah.
But now you're dealing with a middleware issue, right? Now you're dealing with coding.
And this.
And that. Correct. Now you're dealing with coding. And to me, when I look at the enterprise space, these organizations really have some choices, right? They can build something on their own. And I talked with another financial services company literally today, that somebody had built an application, and it was all kind of, built, and it was one person's head. It was proprietary. And when the person left, that software went away. And the ability to kind of replicate it became frustrating. So then they threw that away, and now they're back to the spreadsheets and slamming all those together. And now it takes 4 to 5 days to create invoices for very, very, very complex invoices for a small number of people.
And a lot of that boils down to that, the process automation that's involved in there on those. Because I would guarantee you that most of that proprietary side of that from the person before was figuring out how not to have to do the same thing again next month.
Correct.
So when they leave and own the conveyor belts and how they're plumbed together, the stuff starts falling on the floor.
Yeah. So that's the first flavor, is that you build it on your own. But there's pluses and minuses to that.
Yep.
Second flavor is, take my ERP solution and extend its functionality to kind of meet the needs of my business, right? But that comes with trade-offs of trading, coding, right? And still don't have the agility to make those changes when you want, or I go out and I look at a vendor that, specializes in the space and can make the adaptions and make the changes and kind of work with it. So you have to take a best of breed solution, which is an overplayed, phrase, right? But that's what it is. But you take best of breed vendor and you plug it in to, the whole fabric and the stack, or you just accept you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And you're not, and so then there's opportunity cost of not being able to get there.
So when you start looking into the third option or the second option or the first option, whether it be the proprietary, whether you come through the ERP piece, when we talk about pluses and minuses there, from what I'm hearing, you've got, or have seen actually, is one, you've got more heads and more pieces of integration points of failure.
Correct.
And you have a probably at least a tripling of the communication interfaces necessary to define a process from start to finish between all those integration points. Mm-hmm. And if you have any weak links within that, the ability to apply the appropriate resolution strategy to that can be extremely difficult, both for just from straight communications and understanding what the left side does versus the right side versus how it gets moved in the middle. Mm-hmm. You get the finger pointing thing going on. Well, it's their side, it's in the middle, it's not there. Mm-hmm. So, but the advantage of that is you get to divide and conquer. That's kind of what that's supposed to be one of the big bonuses of it. And when done well, I think you probably maintain some of that benefit, right? Mm-hmm. So then let's go to the third side. Because I'm going to skip proprietary because it is what it is. You bought it, you baked it, you eat it, and they can work great.
And you know what? If you're the size of an organization and you've got the discipline to say we're going to have,
I'm not saying it's
failover,
bad.
We're going to document it, we're going to create it, and a lot of times when it's built internally, it is fantastic and it is great.
If it's done like a software lifecycle project with documentation, with
correct, and but inevitably, what I've seen is that approach usually has a point of diminishing returns, and so and it's usually about the 7, 8, 9 year, maybe 10-year cycle where it just becomes
It's got so many point solutions baked into it that weren't treated as a holistic API or process.
Correct.
So that as you mature and grow and you get more complex on your business, that system gets to the point where you can't manage it anymore.
Correct.
Because you've got so many, and you get even the person that wrote it gets to the point where they're going, because I know I've been involved in some of these projects and trying to uncode the processing with that. It's a reverse engineering exercise. Thing works great, does everything you want it to do, but don't be changing this here.
Yeah.
Because when that happens, we're not really sure what will happen. How can I regression test this? You can't do it anymore. All right. Yeah. So we know that's one of the cons of that. Let's go to the third one, which is a more
somebody
don't like the best of breed.
who
I like to think most agile vendor process. Somebody that can bring the services piece, that can bring the integration knowledge and expertise, the data, because all this stuff is data driven, and the operational efficiencies with their system, because you're going to need all of those over a 5-year contract.
A piece of software that is dedicated to the actual billing function. End of story, right? That is what it does.
Right.
This is it. This is where it lives, right? It's not a CRM, okay? This is what it does right in here. And the other part about, and I keep talking about the differences between telco and enterprise, but on the enterprise space, the pure function of billing and rating tends to be more segmented on the enterprise space. And you don't necessarily take a lot of the other add-on pieces, collections or financials or RevRec or all the other different variables that are kind of, bolt-on, add-on components to the product catalog and to all the other variables. But but it tends to live by itself as a more dedicated, standalone piece of the stack. Does that make sense?
It does, except for the fact that if it doesn't work well with the rest of the stack, what is the benefit you get out of that?
None. And you end up spending a lot of time and money and effort for no reason. And the hard part is everything that a friend of mine talked about the gazinhas and the gazouches, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about, information for whatever industry vertical it is, I don't care if you're in the hospitality industry or financial transactions or you're a stock exchange or whatever it is, all of that usage that comes into the pipe, right? And so then you've got to figure out what are all the different rules? What are the rate codes that I'm going to apply to this usage, right? And then it's where are all the integration points where it goes out, right? So all of the different pieces. What I think is almost harder is that you have to have, all of the different pieces and rules defined on the inbound side and what you want to do with all the usage and all the different traffic components. And then, then where it goes on the outbound is usually a lot easier, but on the inbound consumption piece, how do you want to apply it? And the real driver is, of course, complexity. What are the rating rules? And then on the back end side, let me scratch that in time, that reverse that, because on the back end side, it's not just the outbound feeds of what systems do you go to, but it's also who needs to get greased. Multi-party settlement.
Yep.
Right? How many different parties are involved in the whole transaction, right?
And then you need to talk about the financial controls and auditing on that. Because that becomes
those guys are really sticky about that stuff.
Really picky later on.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about the exit stream here and the audit trail, the same thing applies on the inbound side. Because as a person that's been doing mediation for the last 30 years, one of the biggest challenges is the people that need to use it at the business level usually really don't understand where it came from. And they shouldn't really need to. They need to understand its relevance in their business, why they're using this data. These transactions come in, how it comes in, who cares? They want to know their file was here. They want to know their data has shown up. They need to understand and have reported to them critical timing information. So let's say you've got to do monthly settlements. Well, you can't do the settlement until all the data is there. Well, how do you know all the data is there? What happens if you turn it on and start running it before your data is there? Does all of it?
But you get incomplete output.
Well, how do you know?
Well, you need,
Well,
you need
so
somebody that
you've got to have
understands.
those controls, right?
So that mediation word, by the way.
That's right.
I know it's an older word.
I know.
But and there's a lot
It's
of new,
it's
there's a lot of
uppercase.
There's a whole new words of that the industry's come up
data
with.
in and data out.
Yeah, you're right.
It's been
Exactly
the
what
same.
it
It's
is.
just data.
Right.
So you need to understand who, what, where, when, and why on that data. Who did I get it from? Where's it going? Why am I getting it?
What am I doing to it?
Yep. And then at the end, who got it?
Before
Who's
I
going to
say-
receive it? And then how do you do everything has to have an audit trail.
It's good.
Now and we know that applies to everything here on each one of these systems, but that becomes more challenging to perform a quality audit trail of a data lifecycle of a feed through a multi-touch point system that's applying multiple financial touches to this to generate that sliced pie. And somebody comes back and says, it's wrong. I think you owe me more. So
You got to go back. You got to look
everything.
at all the records. You got to call Bob on the weekends. Hey, we got.
And it depends on your industry as well, because some of those have serious, like if you're in the financial industry and you're doing stock exchanges and things like that, there's some people with like guns and things that will come after you later on if it's
Guys
not
with
right.
sunglasses knocking at
and
your
then
door.
you're, helicopters and things going, no. So you've got the same issue with in every one of the industries. At the end of it, it's the money. Who's got the money? Where'd the money go? Did I get my share of the money? And if somebody's saying I didn't get my money, you need to be able to prove why.
Here it is.
That's the data. But those are all those integration points that you talk about on a complex settlement scenario.
Yeah, and not to beat a dead horse, right? But if you don't have a complex billing situation, right? You don't have multi-party settlement. You don't have 700 rate codes that you need to apply with
Taxing
with
through the
4,000
wazoo.
rules that you apply to it. Then the ERP systems are great.
Mm-hmm.
They're fantastic. They're just a logical extension of the whole stack. It's less points of failure, and plug it in, right? So what the real industry thing is that this enterprise, all-encompassing naming convention and maybe that we're a little biased because we know telco and we know everything else is just considered enterprise. We've been in for instance the airport industries. And what's interesting about the airport industries is that, they have ERP vendors that are specific to the transportation and or airport industry. Yep. And it's the same thing with utility industries and the same with other verticals. And, I've always kind of struggled with what's the right way to kind of look at the number of verticals. There's SAIC, I think is what it is. I can't remember. But there's naming conventions, and they start with 7 types of verticals. And from the 7 verticals, it goes down to 400, subsections or something like that, some crazy number. And so probably a dozen to 2 dozen, somewhere in there, is a logical segmentation of verticals. And the number of verticals that have complex billing out of those, let's just call it 18 or whatever, midpoint, maybe half.
I would say
maybe half have complex.
Let's say 8 to 10.
Yeah, and so out of those, and we've seen it in hospitality, we've seen it in financial services, we've seen it in different, financial tech, we've seen it in business to business, right? When there's a complex business to business requirement.
Yep.
Or business services. Everything from EDI to settlement of expense reports to whatever, right?
Yeah.
So
I would selling commercial data services
or data, exactly.
Office complex.
It's off the charts, but just in honest recognition, if you're an enterprise company, what do you really need? And again, I'm not an advocate of spending 3 years to build requirements. I'm not. I think that's foolishness. And I believe that the best way to do it is shortlist a reasonable number of vendors and have them help you fill out the rest of your requirements, right?
And bring some game to the table, right? You don't show up as a vendor and go, what do you want us to do?
Mm-hmm. And then on the buyer side is to be cognizant that, again, you can talk to any billing vendor and they'll say they can do it. But having the smarts to say, well, how many people, how long, and what's the cost to implement change or to create something new? Those are the real questions that you have to deal with.
Well, and when I'll go back to my sweet spot on part of that. It was that every one of those things you just talked about that's going to provide some sort of billing, whether it's customized, whether it's ERP, or whether it's enterprise, every one of them has to do with some sort of measurement system that has rates and charges applied to them,
of course,
distributions to it. So it's data in, and data out. So that's important. Mm-hmm. So as you boil down those different pieces, you start talking about those different levels of complexity. Mm-hmm. So if you started out building your own proprietary system, like you said, that's probably got a limited life cycle to it based on changes and complexity that comes up with your business over, let's say, a 10-year or 15-year life cycle. Just think of communications, for example, and phone used to be landline. Well, now people have landline and data, streaming, mobility, all these different things. Mm-hmm. So a lot of your traditional service providers are branching out into different segments of
Are we talking telco or are we talking enterprise today?
Well, this is kind of both. It's kind of both. I'm just saying that's part of that model that if I was looking at my systems and I had generated them internally, they were homegrown, and if I'm looking at what can I do with that today, do I spend my time and money trying to refactor my proprietary software to handle the new business opportunities for my industry, no matter what it is, those are some of those metrics that I would want to be looking at. How long? What am I trying to get to? What can my current system do? And then what are my options, ERP or enterprise billing, the other two categories that we're discussing here? I want to be able to walk through each one of those to help drive where I fit as a consumer or a purchaser of those services. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. Making sure that mediation was high in the level of importance and data in, data out.
They've got some new cool, sexy words.
No, I'm sure they do. But see, that's why my hair is white.
I don't know, man. Whatever. But so the other thing I was just thinking about as you were talking is, we've been looking at this from somebody who wants to go look for, a system. All right, and I don't necessarily think that you have to do a rip and replace of the whole fabric. All right, I think you may want if you're an enterprise company that has complex billing requirements and you realize you have limitations, right? Or you've looked at how many coders it takes to kind of implement a change, and you're going, geez, I can't, we can't adapt to the market because I've got 7 ERP vendor X coders that know language, whatever.
Yeah, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
All right, and by the way, their stack or their workload right now is, we can get you that in 3 months. We can do some analysis on that in 3 months. Man, another consideration is to say, well, what if I look at a component or elements of some of these guys that are the best of breed billing only vendors and plug it in to my fabric, right?
To handle the new stuff.
And then to handle the new stuff. And that really implies, and let me not implies, but in the right way is that if you plug it in, the right plug-in should be one that says, I don't need to change what you're sending me, right? And I don't need to change what I'm sending, right? So
Absolutely.
You can keep that the same, but I still want to kind of put in this little block of goodness that allows me to create new stuff, right? Rate it, put all those rules on it, do whatever it is, and then feed the battleship back.
Yep.
Send it back to the big iron, right? That is,
in the format and in the way it speaks
the
today,
way that it is, so that
no
you
change,
no rip and replace, no cardiac heart surgeries, just plug it in, right? And it's like a little power booster. You plug it in, boom.
It's a virtual processor to plug into the side without physically changing your main system. Yeah.
And without having to change all of your skill sets and all your people and all your fiefdoms. Let's be honest with you. I mean, big companies, they've got politics.
Well, yeah.
I own this, right? And they've got,
and there's a risk to
it's
a rip
reality.
and replace is risky.
Exactly.
Well, that's what you brought up an excellent answer to my kind of question regarding that. Your current living system, billing, whatever it is that you're doing, how you process your data, that is proprietary to your business. Or maybe it's not even proprietary, but it kind of is now because you've been customizing this to your business solution for the last 10 years. And if I want to make that change and I want to say, hey, you know what, we've never done an affinity program or a discounter or whatever, pick your X, Y, or Z and go, how would I do that? And you look at the engine that you're working with today, both from the technology, the implementation, the support staff, the coding, everything. It's like, wow, this engine screams and works great on what it does, but it has no provision in it to do any of these things. This track does not exist. I can't get there from here. Do the rip and replace. I mean, all that's huge risk, a lot of time, a lot of expensive. And what if I just said, well, let me minimize the number of touch points to the absolute minimum to feed something that will then give me back exactly what I need and not change. My starting point and ending point are the same. The route just shifted for these things and comes back out. So my end result is I only paid for the new customization, and I didn't have to break any of my old stuff. I think that's a great idea and a great thing to bring up about that.
You don't have to replace the whole factory, right? You don't, all the materials coming into the factory and what's being kind of finished product on the back end side. You don't have to replace all of the different conveyor belts and all of the different processes and robots. It's just, when in step 11 of a 30 step process.
You're going to shunt that stuff over here.
You're going to shunt it over here. You're going to do some magic, create it, right? And then put it back onto the production.
Enter it back into the feed again.
I mean, that may be oversimplified, but that's the way I look at it.
But it's pretty straightforward when it comes down to that from an implementation. We know that process works. So we've been doing that for a number of years with some of our clients that have something that comes up that it's like, can you run this and get this to us? It needs to look like this. Make it look like this. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So you transform that and perform that. And how it happens, they don't care.
And you know what? That begets another question, right? Is that this little, because over the years we've helped clients that have that little one-off. Hey, can you do this one over here with my traffic without having to put in a whole, even a subset of a system?
But it's kind of like that proprietary system over time. But
and that becomes a proprietary step or a process or one-off that you do, and sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, but it becomes extremely efficient and agile for that customer because you go, I can get you to the finish line in 3 steps and 2 weeks versus 500 steps in 5 months. Mm-hmm. Then the end result, the thing that goes in, the final requirement was make it look like this. Yeah. Well, it's easier to put the Play-Doh through the new filter than it is to try and make new Play-Doh. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Okay. Another one I thought that I just had was, sometimes if you take this monetization engine in the enterprise space that supports complex requirements, then the cost of ownership for just that monetization can start to add up. I don't care what system you have.
Absolutely.
Right? I don't care how good it is and how nimble it is. But if you are throwing, more and more weight and more things onto that end objective result, right? Multi-party settlement or complex or massive volumes, inevitably, the more and more you put onto it, reaches a point of diminishing returns.
And actually becomes a negative.
Yeah, and it can become a negative. So again, if you're looking to either, replace or augment, right? It still has to be a 5 to 10 year process, right? And then the other one that should be on a buyer's criteria is the change. Right? Will your business remain static? Right. Maybe it's highly complex, but will you sell one product, one service, one combination, one permutation of what you have today 5 years from now?
Right.
10 years from now? Are you going to introduce a new line of business? Are you going to try some new things? Are you going to buy a company that you're going to try to blend it in? Let's think about that, right? So can your enterprise complex billing system support that, right? And again, everybody's going to say, oh, yes.
It can.
It's how fast.
It's not for how long.
What's that? What's the grass cutting lawnmower thing? It's not how fast you cut your grass, but how well you cut your grass fast.
Yeah, something like that.
I blew that one. I didn't come.
Yeah, that was weak sauce.
That was off. But it's about how fast you can adapt to change. How fast
absolutely
you can put a new line
and do
of
it
business in
cleanly and efficiently at a high speed.
Yeah,
because you bring up a great point. Because let's say you're in a business that is doing a lot of acquisitions. So each one of them
the same thing.
Each one of them has their own. Every one of the challenges and things that we talked about, whether it's a custom built system, ERP, enterprise, or they send it over to somebody else to do it, a third party. Mm-hmm. They have no idea how it works. Well, you have to answer all those questions now over time of, well, how many billing systems or solutions can we support? And then now, how does this fit in? how do we do our accounting on this? Are we going to keep them as their own? Just a lot of questions that come up with from the financial auditing controls to the complexity of supporting multiple systems that may have multiple fiefdoms of expertise or desire to work on these things.
Or
Not that they're bad,
or knowledge about the systems that you've bought this company,
and then
you've brought them in,
or you didn't bring them in. You bought the assets, but not the people.
Correct.
And then the people, it turns out, were the ones that kind of knew how it works. So you've got this thing is like,
Correct.
Anybody know how to get that light to go green?
Right.
So we expect green here, right? Or is this one of these systems is backwards where it's red?
And then it reaches a point where don't touch it, right? It works. So just keep sending it in there. But that's traded off with you do need to have consolidation, centralization of systems. So and then you should have one place in the M&A scenarios, one system that you're trying to get everything over to, right? So that begets the whole conversation of bringing all of these companies that you go by and you bring them onto, and almost all of our customers are either buying other companies
or being bought.
Yeah. Right. And so inevitably then it's, whether it's in the telco space or in the enterprise space, huge element to what we're dealing with. On the M&A side, huge element, because now you're looking at that system and your system. And, sometimes organizations say, this is the one we bought is a better system. Yeah. This one's over here. Then you got politics and fiefdoms and all this kind of stuff that comes into it. But that happens all the time.
So, when you look at those and you break each one of those scenarios, so let's say somebody has, over the last 24 months, acquired 5 businesses with a total of 12 new billing systems within there.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. You've got different flavors of each one of them because they bought somebody before. That adjunct billing engine that can slowly take these pieces in and redo what the other one was without being disruptive has been a successful strategy that I have seen deployed that minimizes the overall, we'll never get all this done mindset.
It reduces the level of effort of migration. It reduces the timeline.
You get it down to a level of units that can be managed too easily.
If I'm a universal consumer of data, even if you have, a large battleship that is not going to go anywhere, right? But if you're out here doing M&As, then you can put in a plug right here that says, well, these 6 guys that I just bought are going to, be the. It's going to be the filter. It's going to be the media. It's kind of like a mediation.
It's
system.
all data going in and coming out, right?
But it's just from a product catalog and a billing perspective. It can provide the same function, and then feed the battleship.
That flexible ability to answer the question, it kind of needs to look like this, because that entity that you purchased, the first thing to do is you don't want to be so disruptive that you break that billing model for them, because you want the money. You bought it, you got assets, you've got stuff. The other one is
critical component.
I need to be able to take that process and begin to coalesce these all together to have more of a centralized billing engine.
Yep.
So if I approach it, let's just kind of spitballing here, from the enterprise only view that it's going to do everything all at once and it's one ginormous project, I think everybody would pretty much look at that and go, that's probably not going to be a very efficient way to get this done. So let's start to block and tackle. We're going to take this and we go, we'll schedule the first 2 that will be the biggest bang for the buck and the quickest way to get them in. And so we can retire those other assets and import the new ones. So that's that requirements. That's that architecture, the plan to kind of figure out. And it's choosing a solution set that allows you to do that.
And we're going to go through some M&A. I want one of those best of breed solutions that can, at a minimum, consume, right? And
make it look like this.
And consume and normalize all of that financial transaction information so that I don't have to wait a year 2 years, 3 years plus to get it onto either the battleship or that best of breed solution.
Or get it through the virtual processor, like I like to think of it as. It's the side piece. You're not putting in a heavy hardware solution on that. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is saying, I'm going to take that piece of information and processing that I'm going to retire the current process at some point. Mm-hmm. But how do I process that, keep it working today so I don't have any disruption? Mm-hmm. And number two is go ahead and get that second channel of processing done, QA'd, performed, and ready to roll. So when I shut the other one off end to end, it works, and I have no disruption. To me, that's the happy space for that, because there's unfortunately, from the data side of it, especially on the M&A, with the age of some of the systems, the loss of gray matter when through attrition in people, and sometimes the acquisitions aren't as clean as you'd like from a turnover perspective. What it used to be.
They rarely are. I don't care what size. I don't care what vertical you are. I don't care where you live.
There's challenges with that.
They are rarely smooth.
The thing where
regardless of vertical, regardless of size, they're rarely smooth.
So that ability to take something and go, at the end of the day, what does it need to do to be finished? What does finished mean for this system? Mm-hmm. Then you work backwards, because lots of times where the data came from, no one really even knows anymore. What was that format? Why does it look like this?
We have a story where we had an exact scenario where it was an M&A, and there was a proprietary billing system that was running this smaller company, and no one knew anything about the data, right? None whatsoever. The rules, it was never, it wasn't documented. What a surprise, right? So it wasn't documented. Nobody knew anything about the rules, right? So inevitably, all of the things that needed to be done were delayed by months and months, because you kind of had to do reverse engineering to try to look at it, the output, and work your way back. And there was no one there to answer any questions about this. And then you're trying to connect the dots with a business representative that knows something about this process, or something about those contracts, or something about that, whatever. And so you have to kind of reverse engineer. So
as best you can.
As best you can.
Because sometimes there's the classic, the spreadsheet with the rules in it that's password protected, and the person one person that used it is no longer with us.
Yeah.
And I mean that. I mean it totally gone.
Which happens a lot.
And that has happened on several occasions. And people have tried, let's use a password crack program to see if we can get through it. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you wind up going, well, where's the last place we can see this data in the clear?
Yeah, that's true.
And then you go, it needs to look like this.
No.
And then you do that process as best you can to figure out, looking into what you can see, and then you have to make some assumptions. That goes to how well your teams work, how experienced they are with answering some of those questions, because there's some of them, those processes will stop for 6 months.
When we say teams, I think that's on both sides.
Oh, absolutely.
That's both the customer and the vendor.
Absolutely.
Right. So, been there, done that, got the T-shirt,
yep,
and the rally on, and then.
And you have to have that collaborative work environment for those people on both sides of that equation, because at the end of the day, there's so many things that the current legacy team that may be not happy, thinking they're going to get replaced, versus the people that are trying to come in and solve the current challenges of locked out data, things that are missing, just meeting the goals of why they were hired to be there. Mm-hmm. So that communications piece, that has to be a well-managed process, because there's, especially on the legacy ones, a lot of challenges with missing information on how those systems work, where the data came from, what actually was transformed, and the idea of going, some of this stuff doesn't need to be the way it used to be, because this is what we want to get out of it.
And by the way, those issues are the same whether you're on the enterprise side or on the telco side, right? But, and M&A is big on the telecom side. I think on the enterprise side, it's a little more pronounced. So,
well, I think it's got more touch points to it.
Yeah.
and it becomes a little more difficult to get those because it's already enterprise.
Yeah.
So now you've got more hands and things that can point and lead you down to rabbit holes, or there's the process that's been used for the last 12 years that does nothing.
Exactly. So what do you think about, all right, so after this conversation, Mr. Brian Preston, have I helped you get a better understanding of the dynamics, challenges, and options and considerations for an enterprise customer when they're looking at either a new system, replacing system, or an adjunct strategy? Have I given you that?
I think
What
you've
have you
given me
learned
a number of items that I would summarize like this, that if I am in the acquisition mode of either an enterprise or an ERP, or I think I'm going to build my own, the ideas and the pluses and minuses you gave me on each one of those areas are all things that I would want to line up on my pros and cons grid here of looking at this. The next thing is I would want to definitely have an understanding of the complexity of the systems that I want to bring together. Is this an ERP style mode where I can have these tight integration
Systems
points?
or my business?
Well, kind of both, because the systems help me run my business. So to me, it's a left to right process. I need it to come out like this. Can I take the ERP approach to this, or do I want to look at the enterprise approach? What are the pluses and minuses we just talked about each one of them? And we kind of walk through that scenario. So I would want to balance what my business model is, what my end objectives are, and then figure out, well, how do I want to approach this? Do I want to buy the one huge chunk and just roll the dice and make, okay, I think it'll all happen, knowing it's probably going to cost some bucks, but you throw enough money at it, it'll get done.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And I always advocate to any buyer, always take a 10-year look, right? And look at, not just the software. Look at your people that are going to be around it, all right? So who's going to really run it, right? Who's really going to modify it? Who's going to deal with the incremental business changes, right? And is that my coding or am I configuring? Okay. What's my future? What's the likelihood of either M&A, right, or introduction of new lines of business, and again, every billing vendor says, I can do that.
So,
well, again, but how fast can you do it?
Well, and
That's the
how
real
much
driver.
of this is actual real configuration, or how much is this actual real new coding in order to meet certain business objectives and why I'm doing this.
And the example I put out before is that if you've got 50 guys that know how to code, right, and you're always going to have 50 guys for the next 10, 15 years, that may be a better strategy.
You'll own all of it,
right? You'll own all of it.
the good and the bad.
Correct. But agility trade-offs, resource, third-party costs.